Story 1. There is roughly a 1 in 5, 2 times 10 to the 61st power chance that if you slapped a table, all the molecules in your hand and in the table would miss one another and your hand would pass through it. I learned this in a deep conversation with my engineering class 2 years ago, so there may be some details I am missing, but the statement is theoretically true. Story 2. There used to be a radioactive energy drink called Radithor that was sold in the United States from 1918 to 1928. Some of the more prominent consumers had to be buried in lead coffins. Story 3. Giant squids have a donut-shaped brain, so their esophagus runs through the middle. If they try to swallow a bite that is too large, they can sustain brain damage. Story 4. You could remove all of Wayne Gretzky's goals from his career totals and he would still be the all-time points leader in the National Hockey League based on assists alone. Bonus fact: Wayne Gretzky and his brother Brent hold the record as the highest-scoring pair of siblings. Brent recorded 4 points in his entire career. Story 5. Every day you go to work, you pass more people than an average medieval person met in their entire life. Story 6. The youngest mother to give birth became pregnant at the age of 4. Story 7. If a gorilla looks grumpy, it is because it is relaxed and at ease. Story 8. The United States of America is the third most populous country on Earth. Adding 1 billion people to its population today would not change that ranking. Story 9. The gravity of a black hole is so great that it bends light around it. If you could stand close enough to a black hole and look straight ahead, you would see the back of your head. Story 10. Greenland extends to the east, west, south, and north of Iceland. Story 11. When Grover Cleveland, the 22nd President of the United States, was 27 years old, he was friends with a married couple who had a baby girl named Frances. As a gift, he bought them a high-end baby stroller for little Frances. 21 years later, he married Frances and she became the youngest First Lady. Think about that. Story 12. A morbidly obese person can survive prolonged complete starvation without illness when closely monitored by medical staff. Studies since the 1960s include a patient in 1973 who underwent a 382-day starvation program for therapeutic purposes under close supervision, receiving only vitamin and mineral supplements and water, with no intake of protein, carbohydrate, or fat. The patient dropped from 207 kilograms to 88 kilograms and maintained the loss. At a 5-year follow-up, the patient weighed 96 kilograms and was stable. Prolonged fasting had no adverse effects in this case. The PubMed central identifier is PMC2495396. Story 13. People were deliberately infected with malaria to cure syphilis, and the Dr. Julius Wagner-Jauregg received the Nobel Prize for this treatment. The extremely high fevers from the malaria infections killed the syphilis-causing bacterium, and patients were then treated for malaria with quinine. Story 14. The life of Frane Selak, the luckiest unlucky man in the world. In January 1962, Frane was riding on a train through a freezing canyon when it fell into an icy river. All 17 other passengers died while he escaped with a broken arm and hypothermia. In 1963, on his first plane trip, he was sucked out of the plane's door and landed in a haystack, unscathed. 19 other people were killed in the crash. In 1966, he was riding in a bus when it skidded off the road into another icy river. 4 passengers drowned while he received only minor cuts and bruises. In 1970, his car's engine burst into flames while he was driving, but he managed to escape before it exploded. In 1973, in another driving incident, his car's engine was doused with hot oil from a broken fuel pump. Flames shot through the air vents and singed off all his hair. He was otherwise unharmed. In 1995, he was hit by a bus but sustained only minor injuries. In 1996, to avoid a head-on collision with a United Nations truck on a mountain curve, he swerved into a guardrail that broke on impact. To save himself, he jumped out of his car's open door and grabbed a tree branch as he watched his car plummet off the cliff. Suffice to say, he had a complicated relationship with the Grim Reaper. Story 15. TASER is an acronym for Thomas A. Swift's electric rifle. Story 16. Ireland was a net exporter of food during the Great Potato Famine. Story 17. More people died building the V-2 rockets, also called Vergeltungswaffe 2, during World War II than were killed by the rockets. Story 18. The Transportation Security Administration's failure rate is over 80%. I know someone who accidentally packed a loaded handgun in his carry-on, got on the plane, and was so frightened after landing that he mailed it home via the United Parcel Service and took a Greyhound bus home. Story 19. Switzerland accidentally entered Liechtenstein 3 times in the last 50 years. The first time, in 1976, the Swiss military got lost and entered Liechtenstein. The people of Liechtenstein offered them drinks as hosts. The second time, in 1992, Swiss forces mistakenly occupied an observation post that was actually in Liechtenstein. They apologized and withdrew. The third time, in 2007, the Swiss army crossed into Liechtenstein by mistake. They realized the error and returned. Liechtenstein did not learn of the incident until the Swiss apologized, and they accepted the apology. Takeaways. The Swiss armed forces have navigational problems. The people of Liechtenstein are relaxed about these incidents. Story 20. An eyewitness to Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater appeared as a contestant on a nationally televised game show with Lucille Ball. Story 21. Only 4 people have been to the Challenger Deep, the deepest part of the ocean. One of them is James Cameron, the director of the film Titanic. Story 22. Between 1613 and 1620, a samurai traveled to Rome via Mexico. At that time, William Shakespeare was still alive. Virginia had been founded about a decade earlier, Galileo had been accused of heresy, and Pocahontas had arrived in England. He met the Pope and was made a Roman citizen. His name was Heiskertsen Inaga, and he was the last Japanese person to visit Europe officially until about 1860. Story 23. President John Tyler, born in 1790, has 2 living grandsons. Story 24. A million seconds ago was the week before last, July 24th. A billion seconds ago was November 1987. Story 25. The exact midpoint of Michael Jackson's life was January 27, 1984, the same day his hair was accidentally set on fire while filming a Pepsi commercial. Story 26. There was a French man named Tarare in the late 1700s who could eat virtually anything and in enormous quantities. He once ate a quarter of a cow in a single day and, during tests, consumed enough for 15 people in one meal. He reportedly swallowed an entire eel, bones and all. During military service, he was used to carry messages by swallowing them. After being captured, he returned to the hospital and sought a cure. While hospitalized, he was suspected of eating an infant and was expelled. He remained of average weight. When he died a few years later, those attending reportedly could see into his stomach by opening his mouth. Story 27. Mike the Headless Chicken lived without a head for 18 months. Story 28. A 500-pound brown bear named Wojciech, who smoked cigarettes and drank beer, was enlisted in and served with the Polish army during World War II. Private Wojciech helped the Polish forces win the brutal Battle of Monte Cassino and was promoted to corporal. After the war, he retired in Scotland. Story 29. If every person on the planet participated in a rock-paper-scissors tournament, with everyone paired and losers eliminated while winners advanced, you would only need to win 33 times in a row to beat all 7,530,000,000 people. Story 30. The longest interval between the births of twins is 87 days. Story 31. There is no universally accepted definition of vegetable. It is a cultural and culinary term, and varies from place to place. Story 32. In chess, there are over 9 million variations after just 3 moves each. There are 288 billion different possible positions after 4 moves each. In a complete game, there are more possible positions than there are electrons in the observable universe. Story 33. More planes were destroyed in World War II than there are intact planes on Earth today. Story 34. Saddam Hussein wrote erotic romance novels in his spare time while he was the dictator of Iraq. Story 35. There is an extremely rare condition called Stone Man syndrome. It causes even the smallest damage to tissue to regrow as bone. People affected by this condition slowly turn into living statues as they age. Story 36. If you launch from Earth, The most difficult place to reach in the solar system is the Sun. To fly directly into the Sun, you must first launch from Earth and then cancel all of Earth's orbital velocity around the Sun. Anything less will place the spacecraft into a different solar orbit rather than a direct descent. The required change in velocity is currently impractical. As an alternative, with relatively little propulsive energy, you could travel out to Pluto's distance, slow down modestly, and then fall back toward the Sun. The trade-off is travel time, which would be on the order of 90 years. There are intermediate trajectories that trade energy for time, but all are more difficult than reaching most other destinations in the solar system for the same energy budget. The Parker Solar Probe is currently traveling to study the Sun. It will not fly directly into the Sun but plans to make closer passes than any probe before. It will perform 7 flybys of Venus to shed orbital energy so it can approach closer and closer to the Sun. The mission duration is planned to be just under 7 years. As of this post, the mission is 1 week short of its first year. Story 37. The Planck scale is the smallest known unit of measurement. If you expanded a single atom until it was the size of the observable universe, about 92 billion light-years in diameter, a single Planck unit at that scale would be about the size of an average tree. Story 38. If you earned $1 every second, it would take 2,921 years to have more money than Bill Gates. Story 39. Every 2 minutes we take as many photos as all of humanity took during the 1800s. Story 40. Spearfish, South Dakota, holds the world record for the fastest recorded temperature change. On January 22, 1943, at about 7:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, the temperature in Spearfish was -4 degrees Fahrenheit, -20 degrees Celsius. A Chinook wind picked up rapidly, and 2 minutes later, at 7:32 a.m., the temperature was 45 degrees Fahrenheit, 7 degrees Celsius. This 49-degree Fahrenheit, 27 degrees Celsius rise in 2 minutes set a world record that still holds. By 9 a.m., the temperature had risen to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees Celsius. Suddenly, the Chinook died down and the temperature tumbled back to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, -20 degrees Celsius. The 58-degree Fahrenheit, 32 degrees Celsius drop took only 27 minutes. Story 41. If you shrink our sun to the size of a white blood cell, the Milky Way would be about the size of the continental United States. Space is vast. Story 42. Stalin, Hitler, and Freud all lived in Vienna at the same time. Tito and Trotsky were also there. Story 43. When Mount Everest was first measured, it was exactly 29,000 feet, but it was reported as 29,002 feet because exactly 29,000 seemed unbelievable. Story 44. Jim Morrison's father was the fleet commander during the Gulf of Tonkin incident. One could argue he played a significant role in helping to start the Vietnam War, which may explain why Jim acted out so much. Story 45. Even if 99% of Earth's population thought you were unattractive, 76 million people would still find you attractive. Story 46. The Hubble Space Telescope can see galaxies billions of light-years away but cannot resolve the equipment we left on the Moon. This shows that galaxies are enormously large, not that the telescope is unimaginably powerful. Story 47. Global Positioning System satellites must compensate for time dilation because time runs at a different rate in orbit. Story 48. We are many times closer to the most recent dinosaur than the earliest dinosaur was to the most recent. Story 49. If sound could travel through space, the roar of the sun would be deafening even though it is 93 million miles away. Sound cannot travel through a vacuum. If the universe were not a vacuum, many stars and planets would make noise, and the resulting pressures and changes would likely be catastrophic for Earth. Story 50. Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809, and the first dinosaur fossil was discovered in 1819. This means he spent his early childhood without going through a dinosaur phase. Story 51. Plastic surgery has nothing to do with the material. The field predates the development of plastics by 70 years. The two terms share a Greek root meaning sculpted or reshaped. Story 52. Our proteins could be left-handed or right-handed, a property called chirality, but they are all left-handed. Story 53. A black widow spider's web is 12 times the tensile strength of steel. Story 54. To scale, the distance between a nucleus and an orbiting electron is 16 times greater than the distance between the Sun and Pluto. Story 55. If Earth were a basketball, at scale the Moon would be a tennis ball. It would orbit about 7.5 meters away, which is much farther than most people think. If the nucleus of a hydrogen atom were a tennis ball, the electron would orbit about 2,500 meters away. No ball would be small enough to represent how tiny electrons would be at this scale. Story 56. The smell of freshly cut grass is actually a distress signal. It results from grass releasing chemicals to save itself from injury. Story 57. The record for the most children born to one mother is 69. The mother was Valentina Vasilyeva, the wife of Feofor Vasilyev, a peasant from Shuya, Russia, who was born in 1707 and died around 1782. In 27 pregnancies, she gave birth to 16 pairs of twins, 7 sets of triplets, and 4 sets of quadruplets. Story 58. You see your nose all the time, but your brain ignores it. Story 59. The Tyrannosaurus rex lived closer in time to us than to the Stegosaurus. Story 60. King George V, Tsar Nicholas, and Kaiser Wilhelm were all grandchildren of Queen Victoria and were first cousins. The Great War was, in part, a family feud. Story 61. I recently learned that the Great Pyramid actually has 8 sides. Story 62. Oxford University predates the Aztec Empire by over 200 years. For fun, one of my favorite facts is that woolly mammoths were still alive when the Great Pyramids at Giza were built. Story 63. Your chances of winning the lottery are the same as your chances of correctly predicting the exact second a randomly chosen animal will sneeze during a 9-year period. Story 64. Sharks can edit their deoxyribonucleic acid, and octopuses can edit their ribonucleic acid. Story 65. The most popular paint color during the 1800s, called mummy brown, was made from Egyptian mummies, both human and animal, primarily cats. It was incredibly popular for a few decades but fell out of favor largely because they ran out of mummies to grind into pigment. Story 66. There is no reliable metric for the number of languages on Earth. Linguists cannot agree on what counts as a distinct language versus a dialect of an existing language. The best current proxy for how many languages exist is the number of translations of the Christian Bible. Story 67. You can fit every planet between the Earth and the Moon, including all the gas giants. If you lined up all of Jeff Bezos's money from end to end, it would go to the Moon and back 34 times. He has enough money to build a ladder to the Moon made of cash. Story 68. You are closer to being a millionaire than Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. Story 69. It is now well known that calculators today have more computing power than the computers on Apollo 11. We reached the Moon using slide rules and great courage. Story 70. In Florida, it is illegal to tie an elephant to a parking meter without first paying the meter as if the elephant were a car. Where in Florida do you find live elephants? Please do not say Disney World and Dumbo. Story 71. And Frank Martin Luther King Jr. and Barbara Walters were all born in the same year. Story 72. Millions of trees are planted each year because squirrels forget where they hide their nuts. Story 73. There are more trees on Earth than stars in the Milky Way. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, you have probably created an order that is unique compared with every other shuffle in history. Story 74. In a clownfish colony, there is only one female. When she dies, the most dominant male becomes female. They are all born male. Story 75. There can be multiple fathers for a single litter of kittens. Story 76. Giraffes have valves not only in their veins like humans, but also in their arteries. This makes sense because they need blood to flow up their long neck. Story 77. Alaska is the northernmost, westernmost, and easternmost state. Story 78. This may have already been posted, but to create a queen bee, a larva must be fed royal jelly. Story 79. Only 66 years passed between the first manned flight in 1903 and the first moon landing in 1969. Orville Wright died on January 30th, 1948, so he missed the moon landing by 21 years. That really is not a long time when you think about it. Story 80. The sense of smell is molecular, meaning that molecules of the odors you detect enter your body when you smell them. Think about that the next time you enter a public restroom. Story 81. Your body contains more foreign cells, such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi, than your own cells. Story 82. One day Mao Zedong saw a sparrow eating grain. Thinking the sparrows were harming China's grain supply, he and the Communist Party launched the Four Pests campaign. The Chinese military and the population killed every sparrow they could find. Embassies did not allow the Chinese to kill sparrows on their property, so people banged pots and pans outside the embassies around the clock until the sparrows died of exhaustion. Unfortunately, sparrows mainly eat insects, not grain, and the locust population exploded. Approximately 43 million people starved to death. Story 83. Over the past 3,000 years, only 268 years were entirely without war worldwide. Story 84. David, the statue by Michelangelo, was carved from mediocre marble that nobody wanted to sculpt, but it was too expensive to discard. Story 85. The elephant and the rock hyrax are related. A cross-section of an elephant's foot shows the arrangement of the bones is very similar to the way a human's bones are structured. Story 86. In the year 1000 before Christ, a war was cancelled due to rain. Woo! First silver. Thank you, stranger. Story 87. There are more chickens, over 22 billion, than people in the world. Story 88. Transforming the Sahara Desert into a forest would have serious negative effects worldwide. Story 89. If you could fold a piece of printer paper in half 103 times, it would be as wide as the observable universe. Story 90. Some sharks swimming near Greenland are 500 years old. Story 91. The Trinitrotoluene Minecraft parody song has more views on YouTube than the original song Dynamite. Story 92. Coconut water is not sterile and should not be used as a substitute for human blood plasma. Story 93. Police officers are not legally obligated to help anyone. That surprised me, but it's true. The Supreme Court has ruled they do not have a legal duty to provide assistance. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.